Welcome everyone, we're excited to share some country wisdom with you.
King Solomon had a thing or two to say about the path to wisdom. In Proverbs 4, he wrote, "Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Keep straight the path of your feet, and all your ways will be sure."
Join us now for Country Wisdom. I'm holding up a book, Hope in Present Danger. I mean, it's an incredible book. I went through it and, well, Janice, I had tears multiple times. I may have tears in the interview today. Matter of fact, I can probably guarantee it. Almost crack up now just thinking about what's in this book. But I've got Adriana Passos here with us today and her family. Adriana, would you introduce your family?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us here. This is my dad, Cornelio, and my mom, Micaela. And we're just blessed to be here together and share our story.
Now, this story is about getting out of communism. I mean, in a country that was steeped in control and everything you can imagine, they felt led by God to get out. And this is their story now of how miraculously and incredibly the whole family finally got out. Adriana, start way back. I mean, you were in Romania and the family, you were how old when the family you started realizing there's some problem in the way life existence goes on in Romania?
Sure. So I was fortunate enough and blessed enough to actually grow up in a Seventh-day Adventist family, in a Christian family who loved God. So I grew up with the stories of the Bible, my grandmother just sharing with me the beautiful stories of the Bible. And I remember my favorite one was the story of Joseph. And so I really didn't realize, I think, the danger and the difficulty that we were living in until really by the time I actually got to school. So in the first grade, I remember going to school, and the school in Romania was actually from Monday through Saturday. So first grade
So you had an issue right off the bat.
Yeah, but I went to school. And interestingly enough, my mom and dad, neither my grandmother, actually told me not to do otherwise. We just went to school. And so I remember going to school on Sabbath, and clearly my parents and my grandparents would go to church. And I would come back, and so that was first grade, second grade, third grade. And then at that point, it began dawning on me, there's a difference here, because all along before that, we would all go to church on Sabbath. And so that became marked in my brain as to, there is a difference here. And I remember coming to Mom and saying, "Mom, I don't want to go to school on Saturday. I don't want to go to school on Sabbath." And I thought, was it because I just really didn't want to go to school? Because that would be a fun way out. But I remember Mom telling me, "Why is it that you don't want to go to school on Sabbath?" And, at 9 years old, it was about that time, I think it was Mom. At about 9 years old, Mom said, "You need to know why it is that you do not want to go to school on Saturday, because it has to be your choice and your decision, because if you make that choice will bring with it a lot of consequence." And after a while, I said, "Yes, I'm sure. I'm not going to go to school on Sabbath anymore." And so that's when I began experiencing, some of the avalanche of what it really meant to stand for God at 9 years old.
If you don't live it, it's very hard to understand. Because there were so many ramifications of this regime, should I say, then really they said one thing and they did another thing. They were talking all the time about freedom, but freedom didn't exist. Then I understand, because some people, they are caught in this trap and they think it is the ideal to everybody to be equal, but it's not true. It's a very big lie.
You also,
Go ahead.
You also didn't always have the best relationship with neighbors. That's one thing that struck me, was the neighbors that you had watching everything you're doing, reporting anything that they thought was suspicious.
In fact,
Including
I
a neighbor, did you
think,
have one who would just walk in your house?
actually, we had very good relationship with them, serving them, taking pictures for them, but exactly how you said, they were informers. Then they came suddenly without telling us, you know how we do here in America. You know, if we want to visit you, I have to call you and say, may I come because I want to discuss something or ask you a question. And you set a time, then I'm gonna go. But that didn't happen. All of the sudden, then all the time we should be very careful how everything, you know, because we've been photographers, we have to have work, and if they would see we have a lot of work, they would go and report that.
Now, were there certain things that maybe you wanted to do in life but you couldn't do? You had restrictions that...
There were a lot of things, because before, for a period of time, we had our business, like photography business, was covered in a way that we had peace.
How did that even, you know, develop in your mind of leaving? I mean, when you're locked down, you're afraid you're going to jail at maybe any time. What even began to give you an idea you could get out?
You know what it's impossible for us, it's possible with God. And that was our idea. Then, after that, where my parents lived, we saw an excursion in Turkey for 5 days. And Lord, you know, I was talking with my husband and I said, what do you think if I and Speranza gonna go? And he said, okay, apply.
Under communism, you didn't have permission to travel with the entire family, because they knew that if you were outside in the West, more than likely you would escape and you would not return. And so that was number one.
But if they kept some of you back here,
exactly,
it's more likely you're
there
going
was,
to come back.
Correct. So there was always insurance. And so that insurance was, you're not going to go with the entire family. You're not allowed. So some have to be back. And so that in itself was their assurance that they would be able to bring back the family. And so that was that. I think that beyond that, and the reason why this was so intense was because, you know, previous to that, my aunt and uncle had traveled. So it was not just our family, it was our entire extended family. My aunt and uncle realized that they needed to escape. My other uncle, who had actually been approached by the Securitate, the Romanian KGB, he had been approached and he was asked, told to be an informant against the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Romania. And so he took a little bit of time and said, let me think about this, because the Securitate in Romania, there were informants in the church. Every single Seventh-day Adventist church had an informant.
At least one.
At least one, if not more, that would inform the Securitate what was happening. And so they always had an eye on everything that you were doing.
That's the uncle I was thinking of, because the way he got out of the country was a book all on its own.
Correct, and that's a story in itself. But so he was approached. He said, "Let me think about it." As he was thinking about it, my other aunt and uncle had applied for an excursion, leaving their son back in Romania, the insurance back in Romania. So they were given the visa to go and visit Austria. So they were there. My uncle then paid a very large sum of money to someone who lived on the Danube, so on the border of what was then Yugoslavia, Romania and Yugoslavia. And he was a swimmer. My uncle was a weightlifting coach. He had, you know, his team that was traveling throughout Eastern Europe, though not West, and which was behind the Iron Curtain. And so he was very fit. He was, you know, someone that could withstand swimming. And so he paid a large sum of money to someone, had to trust that person after giving them a very large sum of money. And the person said, you know what, I can help you escape, and you have to do it during the midnight shifting of the guards. The guards are shifting at midnight. They take the night shift, comes in, and so I will lower you in this boat, and you know, then you swim. You know, from there you swim across into Yugoslavia. You're gonna have to be very careful, because if they find you, they have huge propellers, and you will be cut to pieces pretty much if they find you. So you need to be careful. And so that was happening in the background. I didn't know any of that. Everything was going on in the background. So my parents had all of that background. And so that was the impetus of them having to find a way for us to actually get out. Because if the communists, and when the communists, not if, when the communists would find out that my aunt and uncle had already requested, they are not coming back because their deadline was a certain date, they were not going to return. My other uncle, who had been approached by the communists to be an informant, he disappears. Then all
Your
eyes
whole
are
family,
on
they
us.
really would have been watching you.
Exactly. All eyes are on us.
I hold in my hands a dramatic and engaging book. Let me read you something. He made it, he's alive. With those words, my father dropped the phone, collapsed to the ground, and began crying uncontrollably. Shocked, I stood there, my heart pounding faster and faster. My mind began jumping to frightening conclusions. After what seemed like an eternity, my parents motioned for me to sit down. Scared, I lowered myself to the ground and squeezed in between them. And for the very first time in my life, I heard them whisper to me the incredible plan my family had orchestrated to escape communist Romania to freedom.
When Adriana Passos was just 14, her family became targets of the Romanian secret police. And this book, Hope in Present Danger, tells her incredible story. You can get your copy for a donation of just $14.95 or more at talkingdonkeyinternational.org. That's talkingdonkeyinternational.org. I don't like surprises. I like to know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. I make lists, and I always have a plan A, B, and sometimes C. Needless to say, in today's uncertain world, I struggle with an embarrassing amount of anxiety. If that sounds familiar, you need to send for this free pamphlet, Certainty in an Uncertain World. To order your free copy, go to talkingdonkeyinternational.org and request offer number 121 and find hope for today and tomorrow.
Adriana, let's maybe set the stage and the foundation here. How old are you and your sister, and your mom and dad have been married how long, and kind of pull it all together at this moment?
Sure. So I will leave it for Mom to tell me how many years were you married when all this was happening, Mom, with Dad. I was 14. My little sister was 4 years old, but I'm not sure exactly how many years you guys were married at that point. About 16 years, wasn't it? No?
16 years, that period of time.
Right.
This is a traumatic situation now, thinking of any kind of separation.
Right.
I've got kids, and when I was reading your book, I thought, what would it take? I can't even imagine what kind of stresses, what kind of danger it would take for me to be so desperately in need of getting this one out that I could even consider leaving the other one behind. You know, how do you get to have to make a choice like that?
Nobody can understand if it's not in that situation in the regime, in the communist regime. People would do, quote unquote, the impossible to get free. And it's hard. We decided as a family. I asked my husband, I said, do you want us to go or no? I have to know because I don't want, and it's true. After we left, he got in the hospital. He was sick.
From the stress.
From the stress, and of course, you know, it was terrible. All the questions, all the, wherever he went, where he applied, and you know.
Am trăit o emoție extraordinar de mare, pentru că știam că dacă sistemul comunist află că eu am știut că ea rămâne, eu puteam să fiu mort, puteam să fiu pedepsit, puteam să nu mai plec niciodată din țară. 3 lucruri. Și a trebuit să fac așa un joc ca să nu mă bănuiască că eu am știut.
I was going to ask that because you couldn't let on that you knew they weren't coming home.
Correct.
Plecarea lui mama în excursie, fericirea ei a fost că i-a aprobat că n-a știut, când faci formularul de plecare, trebuie să spui dacă ai pe cineva în străinătate, dacă ai rude, dacă ai, știi? Și ea dacă spunea că frate să-i pleca și sora îi pleca, nu i-a aprobat. Încă nu s-a declarat în țară că ei au rămas și nu mai vin. Și când a venit excursia înapoi din Turcia cu mama și cu tine, eu m-am dus la autobuz să vă aștept.
They had to keep you in the dark.
They had to keep me in the dark.
So that you didn't accidentally let on.
No, I had no idea what was happening in the background. My parents knew. I had no idea. However, I remember like it was yesterday. There was one afternoon when the phone rang. We were at my aunt and uncle's apartment, and the phone rang, and I remember Dad just running to the phone
And crying.
and all I could hear and see was him saying, praise God, you're alive. And then he just dropped to the ground and he continued crying. And I'm like, what just happened? Who's alive? What is going on? And that's when my mom and dad began telling me what had just happened, that my aunt and uncle were actually not coming back from that excursion in Austria, and that my uncle had just crossed the Danube, had just swam at night during the night shift switching of the guards, and he walked all the way into Yugoslavia, and then on foot made it to Trieste, Italy. For an entire week, my parents had no clue if he was dead or alive. They had no idea what had happened to him. And after an entire week of waiting, so imagine they're holding all of this in their hearts. And I have no idea what is happening, and they have to just do life as normal with all of this heaviness in their hearts. And so the phone call comes, they find out he's alive, and then they're realizing we have to apply for an excursion at that moment because
the clock is ticking. You got a very short window.
Exactly. And so that is how the whole thing comes about. And that is when I find out, oh my goodness, my parents had just applied for that excursion. We had no idea. That's when I find out. It's just my mom and I, and I'm thinking, what is happening? I'm 14. What does this mean? How do you do this? And so the day before, literally hours before the trip was to take place in the morning, we found out that we were approved.
So here's the
literally
situation.
Hours in the afternoon, like, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, with a trip leaving tomorrow morning at 6:30 or 7 o'clock.
What happened when the two of you knew you had to make that immediate decision? What's going on between the two of you, husband and wife, that knows you may never see each other again?
Because there was no guarantee
that
that just because you were on the outside that you could get them out.
It was a very tough decision, but a lot of times God, most of the time in our lives, God is the one which is leading us. A lot of times we are not in the picture, really. Lord is telling us, you have to do this. You know, the Bible says, I'm going to tell you when you have to take a right, when you have to take a left. And this is what happens. We knew gonna be very hard. And I was broken when I saw my husband. He wasn't able to drive the car. He stopped the car. He was weeping. All of us weeping.
He had to pull over because he just couldn't drive.
Yeah. And we went in Brasov to our home there to take whatever, we need. I needed for her some things, and that was part of the pain. But in the morning when we left.
So you're home now with a 4-year-old girl. You two are traveling, quote, on a tourist trip.
We knew in the back of our mind that God was leading this. And that's why I think we could make it. Otherwise, we couldn't make it.
You wouldn't have had the strength
if
otherwise.
we wouldn't know that God was arranging 3 brothers, my sister, my brother, and I, our families were able to leave the country.
Within days of each other, within weeks of each other. And
Weeks.
Weeks. Într-o lună și ceva au plecat toți 3.
In about a month, all my mom, the
We
3
were
brothers,
the last. We were the last.
in about a month to escape, and separate ways.
Yeah. And when I saw Cornelia, which was 4 years and a half, I didn't doubt in my mind that I wouldn't see her again in that morning. My heart was broken because I have to leave her behind.
I hold in my hands a dramatic and engaging book. Let me read you something. He made it, he's alive. With those words, my father dropped the phone, collapsed to the ground, and began crying uncontrollably. Shocked, I stood there, my heart pounding faster and faster. My mind began jumping to frightening conclusions. After what seemed like an eternity, my parents motioned for me to sit down. Scared, I lowered myself to the ground and squeezed in between them. And for the very first time in my life, I heard them whisper to me the incredible plan my family had orchestrated to escape communist Romania to freedom.
When Adriana Passos was just 14, her family became targets of the Romanian secret police. And this book, Hope in Present Danger, tells her incredible story. You can get your copy for a donation of just $14.95 or more at TalkingDonkeyInternational.org. That's TalkingDonkeyInternational.org.
In the morning, because after we got the approval, we found out that yes, we were leaving the following morning. It was days, it was hours literally between the time we found out and the morning where we had to leave. And I remember clearly my dad that night before, he took a camera, took the spool, the film out of the camera and put in there 300 Deutschmarks. We in Romania under communism, you were not allowed to have any foreign currency. If they found you with foreign currency, they would throw you in jail because they knew that you had contact with the West. Going back to what the world was like in Romania, it was under the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, the worst dictators of this modern age, really. The people in the country were literally, many of them were starving, and he was actually feeding his dogs on gold scales meat, where people couldn't find meat, they couldn't find food. You would go into stores and the stores pretty much were empty. The irony of all of it was that there were stores that were full to the rim, that were specifically made for the tourists, for the foreign tourists that would come and visit Romania. And we as Romanians would not be able to enter into those stores or make any purchases. So you have the contrast of Romanian stores being empty. Sometimes I remember hours standing in line for a liter of oil or a kilogram of sugar or flour, for hours.
3 o'clock
or
in the
milk,
morning.
3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes my mom would give me a book and said, stay in line, 8 hours sometimes. And at times I would actually get to the line and they would say, sorry, there's nothing left. And so that was the milieu in which we lived. That is the power of communism, right? That is the beauty of being equal, which was a farce. It's a lie. There is no such thing. That's a utopia. I believe that that kind of an imagery.
Some people were always a little more equal than others.
Yes, yes, yeah. So all of that was happening, and so, you know, the telephones were tapped, the people were being followed. 1 out of 3 was an informant. You didn't know who was an informant. You had to keep a poker face. We had no idea. So all of that to say that that morning or that evening, my dad actually took the 300 Deutschmarks, put them in the spool of the film, handed back the camera to my mom. Yeah, handed back the camera to my mom. And he warned her, be careful with this. You know what they'll do to you if they find it.
Basically, communism forces you to do all these things just to survive.
Correct.
And you find you've got a plan to do this and do
Yes,
that.
yeah. And so then that morning, I remember just gathering around it. We were at our grandparents' villa, and they had a beautiful place. And I remember it as it was yesterday. It was a glorious morning, and my heart was just, there were so many mixed emotions, wondering what did this mean? What will this mean? Will we be able to get out? And so the plan was that we would leave, we would get to Turkey, somehow or other make it, and really connect to someone who can help us. And I remember mom walking over to Cornelia, who was 4, and she was sleeping in perfect peace. And I remember you just bending down over her and kissing her.
You know, I really believe here in America we know the price of freedom. And that time, I mean, in my mind, I knew that for freedom we have to pay a price.
Thank you for watching. Join us again for another exciting Country Wisdom.
See you next time.